In our last episode, we pushed the Corolla in the garage, replaced the gas, checked the oil and coolant, tested the compression, installed new plug wires, timed the ignition, and we were rewarded with this. Now that the engine starts, we need to make sure the Corolla can stop when we ask it to. Crack the lug nuts loose while the tire is still on the ground. We're going to put a jack stand underneath the car, just in case. Between episodes, I taught my lug nuts a new trick. I'm glad those rusty nuts broke free easily, because if I had to call Matthew, he would have been insufferably smug for about a month. Well, that's been on there a while. I'm not so much worried about the dirt as I am the creatures that may have taken up residence in the wheel well while the car sat outside for so long. Notice anything about this? The rotor is behind the hub. Most modern cars have the rotor sandwiched between the hub and the wheel. Let's take a look at those brake pads. The hole in the brake caliper is an inspection window. It looks like there is no friction material on the pads. But if you wedge your head in there just right, you can see that there's about 1 millimeter of pad left. Item number 1 on the shopping list, brake pads. The tie rod boot is intact but looks empty. I didn't feel any play in the wheel, so I think we can get away with just putting some grease in it. The sway bar end links look, well, 35 years old. I'll order a set of brake rotors while I'm at it. While we're waiting for the brake parts to come in, let's hit those fasteners with some penetrating fluid. Let's see what we'll need for the back brakes. I already loosened these lug nuts, so I'll just gun them off real quick. Everything looks serviceable, but there's oil on the backing plate. Yeah, there's a leak in there somewhere. Here's another telltale sign of a leak. Add rear wheel cylinders to the shopping list. Let's grab some tools to get that rear drum off. How convenient. An M8 by 1.25 bolt screws into the threaded holes in the drum, which allows you to push the drum off the hub. Sometimes it requires a little persuasion. Oh man, that is looking really nasty in there. It's going to require a good cleaning. This is the source of the leak, and since brake fluid has gotten all over everything in here, including the shoes, we'll just go ahead and replace it all. While the clutch is hydraulic, it shouldn't go in that easily. Add master and slave cylinders to the shopping list. Look what the delivery driver dropped off at the Wrenchmine. Let's get started putting those parts where they belong. To get to the rotor, we have to pull the caliper and the caliper bracket first. It looks like the penetrating fluid did its job. These bolts are coming out pretty easy. Of course, the parts have still been together for 35 years, so a little pry bar action may be needed to get them apart. Now I just have to figure out the best place to put the pry bar to get them apart. The S-hook allows us to hang the caliper from the spring instead of letting it dangle from the brake hose, which is never a good idea. We'll pull the caliper bracket so we can clean up the guide pin and the brake pad mounting hardware. Carefully remove the brake pad mounting hardware because if your new brake pads don't come with new hardware, you'll have to reuse these. We'll clean up the brake pad mounting hardware by giving it a few hours in the vibratory cleaner. The grit in the basket will take all the dirt and grime off the parts. It'll take a few hours and the thing makes a lot of noise. Let's knock the dirt and rust off the caliper mounting bracket. I value my lungs, so I'm wearing an OSHA approved dust mask. Cleaned up nice. Now that the caliper mounting bracket is clean, let's give it a good wipe down with some pre-paint. The cleaner the surface, the better our chances are of getting a good result with the primer and paint. Blue painter's tape will mask the guide pin. Since the caliper floats on this pin, it's important not to get any primer or paint on it. Since the caliper is bare metal, we'll use an etch primer as a base for the paint. Take your time and give all the surfaces a good coat. Hang the bracket inside to dry thoroughly. 24 hours should be enough. I'd show you the paint process, but I had to paint the bracket on a warm winter day in between thunderstorms. Weather. Let's get that rotor replaced. Like I said before, the rotor is bolted to the back of the hub, so the hub has to come off. Start with the grease cap. Remove the cotter pin. Remove the castellated nut cover and the spindle nut. The hub and bearing should pull right off. Those are the bolts that hold the rotor on the hub. The rotor bolts have been in place for a long time and were seized pretty good. I couldn't get the nuts to break loose before the rotor started to spin in my hand, so I bolted the hub back into the wheel and cracked the bolts loose with a big breaker bar. Now I can just gut them off. The rotor is stuck, so now I have to bolt the hub into the wheel again to pry the rotor off. Should have just left it in there in the first place. Gun it up tight. 2 lug nuts ought to hold it. It doesn't take too much force to free up the rotor. I hit the hub with the wire wheel to knock the dirt and grime off, and do a bit of unglamorous work to keep the workbench semi-clean. Let's attach our shiny new rotor to the hub using the old bolts. Let's bolt the hub back up. Slip it on the spindle. Place the outer bearing on the spindle. Screw on the spindle nut until you feel binding and just a touch more. Put the castellated nut cover on. Put the cotter pin in and bend one leg up so it doesn't fall out. Don't forget the grease cap. Okay, let's get the rest of the brake back together. Grab our freshly painted caliper bracket. While nothing's in the way, we can hit the rotor with some brake cleaner. Reinstall the cleaned up hardware on the bracket. Bolt the bracket back in. Carefully place the inside pad into the bracket. And now the outside pad. Put some copper grease on the caliper where the pads will touch to cut down on unwanted noise. And grease the alignment shaft so it can slide in with ease. Put the caliper on the bracket, reinstall the guide bolt, and tighten it down. All in all, it's a pretty simple process. On to the back brakes. I'm trying not to brutalize the parts while disassembling because I may have to reuse some. And here's the part I hate the most, cleaning off years of oily grime. You can tell this thing has been leaking for a while, but that's okay. It's one of the bargaining points on the price of the Corolla. With the outside of the backing plate cleaned, we'll get the last of the old parts taken off. And of course there isn't a lot of room or a good place to stick your head to see the backside easily. What I wouldn't give for a nice lift. A little more persuasion to get the wheel cylinder to let go. Let's get some new parts for the rear brakes. Put them on in reverse order that we took them off. The wheel cylinder goes on without much fuss. Only use a flare nut wrench on your brake line fittings. A regular wrench doesn't distribute the forces evenly around the fitting and can bend them. After all, they are hollow. The left side brake shoe goes on with just a bit of effort. The right side gave me some problems. I struggled with it for a while, and with Matt's help we got it together. It left me a little frazzled, so to finish up the job I broke out the biggest tool in my arsenal. And on that smelly note, we both ran out of the mine for some fresh air. Join us again for the next thrilling episode of Project Crunchyrolla, where the first step in fixing something under the hood is to remove the driver's seat.